Hi everybody, welcome to something different from BHP Advisory. We're going to go through some of the papers from Monday and try and reinterpret some of the articles which might be relevant to our clients or clients of yourselves. I know it's a bit different, it's something you might see on a Sunday morning on the sofa from the politics show. There is no political agenda with this, but we just think some of the interpretations in the press from our point of view of advisors are very useful to pass on to our clients. And we'll actually start with something which is very political and a very interesting article, and it's done by Roger Bootle. I was looking at this online, and it's in the Telegraph, obviously a rather Tory-driven paper, and the headline is "The best thing the state can do for growth is to go away." And the article, very interesting as the levels of taxation and therefore performance of countries. He often talks about the performance of Europe at the moment and the fact that their taxation is far more involved, and you get bigger governments, particularly in countries like France, than you do within the UK. And he is obviously a free marketist. I do like Roger Bootle. I've read some of his stuff before. He's the MD of Capital Markets. He's a very well-renowned city economist, but he certainly sits in the Thatcher camp when it comes to taxation and minimal government, obviously not in the Labour camp with both Eds Miliband, etc. and Ball wanting to spend their way out of recession or keep the economy moving forward by spending more. Roger in his article actually points to a very interesting issue on the percentage of debt to GDP in these countries. For the overall gross domestic product that the country has and the levels of borrowing that contained within it, and at about 40% it is statistically proven that countries which borrow over that amount relevant to GDP operate very inefficiently. And it brings to questions minds in our companies, our clients, and the levels of borrowing with our clients. If you see an overall level of borrowing to the value of the balance sheet, do they perform better than others? But more importantly for our clients, and where we can help, is where you have an indication that he blames a lack of productivity in the workforce is because they're being taxed too much. So what possibilities are out there to get away from taxation and planning properly, particularly with employee incentive schemes and salary sacrifice, etc. At the firm we have a specialist team of people to look at that, which I think is fantastic. Staying with the Telegraph, however, moving on from tax onto pensions, I thought this was fantastic article by Marion Drakers, who's the financial services editor. I'm sure my colleague Joy Clegg would be interested in this, because the title is "Pension Rule Changes See Millions of Savers Ditch Gold-Plated Pensions." It's always been a rule with any of our clients that if they have a final salary scheme and it is gold-plated, that should not be touched, because they were so rare. It's obviously why a lot of companies have what they call a pension black hole, because the amount set aside cannot fulfil the final salary. But they reckon in this article about 30% of these schemes are going to be dipped into to plug the gap between here and now and when people retire, and the value gap that people are going to face because state pensions and other types of pensions are going to perform so poorly. So the old rules are kind of out with these pensions are going to have to be tapped into. And this is all because of the pension rule changes. I hope you are aware of them, that you can access the capital in pensions now. So the whole landscape of pensions is completely changing, which I find fascinating. Our advisory clients often get pointed towards the lifetime cash flow planning, which we do, where we'll look at what the future lines and all these rule changes and how much pension capital needs to be put away. So I found that very interesting. When we were reading the Financial Times, something I remember speaking at a dinner a couple of months ago, and Russia was on the agenda, and I pointed towards the Ukraine and Putin's rather aggressive stance on a military basis, all being underpinned by the fact that crude prices were very high and a lot of Russia's country's wealth comes from oil. And I made the point at the time that if the oil price dropped, then Putin would certainly have a different agenda. Now, we have economic sanctions against Russia. We have a few clients that deal in Russia, and that's unfortunately hurting them. I do know JCB account for a third of all the Russian capital sales for JCB. A third of them go to Russia. So I know that they're hampered by the economic sanctions, but obviously I don't know if you are aware, I'm sure if you are in manufacturing that you will be, that crude has actually dropped 83 last week. It's now trading at $86 a barrel. The prices have dropped below the magic 90 mark for Russia, and that is having economic consequences. But the article in the Financial Times, which we're reading on the iPad, was all about Saudi Arabia's reaction to this, and do they cut production, and how do they stay competitive? And the article points towards the fact that they are probably going to keep production at the same level. Prices would have to drop below the 80 mark, probably 76, for them to make a difference. And we see Brent crude actually making an impact into 2015. So energy prices across the board in your companies you might see coming down in 2015 because of Saudi Arabia's reaction to this. Andrew Ravel writes the article. It's very well written, and it certainly you should keep an eye on the price of Brent, because if Saudi Arabia did make a reaction, then obviously shale would start to increase in the US, and whether there was a wider political agenda with that, we'll have to wait and see. But I would expect some sort of energy impact in 2015, according to this article. But obviously, I'm not an economist, so don't take my word for it. But staying with the economy, we've gone the Telegraph and the Financial Times, and to be truly across the political spectrum, obviously BHP has no political allegiance. There was an article in the Guardian of all papers about UK interest rate conundrum and the agony and the ecstasy, which I thought, again, this was a very, very well written article by Laurie Elliott, and he points to effectively the labour slack, and this is interesting for a lot of you. There's been 750,000 new jobs created in the last 12 months within the UK market, but labour wage inflation has only seen a 1% digit movement, and that's why they're blaming effectively interest rates are not going to increase in the short term, but we will see a rate increase next year. So anybody with variable debt payments and loans, do have a word with us, because you might see some rate change. The article points to the agony and the ecstasy, and depending on how you measure it, and this is, I suppose, is what is debated across the Commons all the time. We are actually within the GDP 7 countries at the moment. We are the fastest growing economy, and we're certainly the strongest in Europe. But on the other hand, if everything's going well, why don't we have such an impact on the agony side as opposed to the ecstasy side? The agony is real wage growth and productivity versus growth and unemployment and inflation. So you have these two different measures. Trying to demystify all of that effectively, we're all taking on more staff, but wages aren't going up. I don't know if you see that, if you agree with that, but whether we will all find a wage increase demand next year. I know we are in financial services, I know they are in banking, there are certain sectors, so I don't know whether you're seeing wage pressures in your business. And finally, again, to sweep the papers, an article very close to my heart. Obviously my firm stretches across the whole of the county of Yorkshire, and I wrote an article recently about if we have Devo Max for Scotland and the UK is run on that basis, and England find themselves having more powers, then the county of Yorkshire needs to be more unified. It incredibly personally frustrates me how we have different LEPs with different economic agendas, because we essentially have parochialism creeping into commercial affairs. We have competition between Hull and York and Harrogate and Sheffield, and or mostly competing with Leeds, which is the biggest city, and Leeds doesn't seem to really care, only competes with Manchester. But this is an article here called Devo Manc City Dreams of a Northern Renaissance. Richard Lee's the leader of Manchester City Council. He wants 2/3 of public spending to be locally controlled. My article pointed towards that if we are going to, as a county, have any chance of getting what falls out of the Westminster pot, we need to be more joined up. I do know that there are various public meetings where the LEPs say they work together, but I think if you look over the Pennines, and the Manchester City region has been unified for a long time and certainly outperformed Yorkshire with our separate agendas. So just finishing on a personal note for me there. Hope you enjoyed that. We'll be back most Mondays. If you find anything of interest, obviously do tweet me or drop me a note or give me a ring, and we can discuss it for your business. All the best.